Becky, can
hey,
people
everybody.
actually join?
Yes. Yep, I think everyone can see us now. In just a second while I get our cast up on Twitter, and then we will start.
I'm glad you're running the show, Becky.
Thanks. I have been like for 4 hours this morning. I'm like, okay, do I make sure that I have everything good? But we're live now. Welcome, everybody. It looks like we have a ton of people here. It's a very special Todoist office hours. We have a guest here, Jesse Amir from YNAB. He's the CEO, founder. I'm very excited. I've been a Todoist and YNAB user for many, many years. I rely on these apps every day to keep my life organized. I don't know what I would do without them. I see a lot of people in the chat are saying the same thing. So yeah, there's obviously a lot of synergy between our products, but also the companies behind the products. Very similar. A lot of you may not know, but we're both remote companies with teammates around the world, both bootstrapped, independent, profitable, and really focused on sustainable growth, which is really cool. Both operate in very crowded marketplaces with a lot of alternatives, including free alternatives, from giant corporations. And so it's really cool to see, we're really buoyed by a passionate community of users who love our products and clearly overlapping communities of users. So I'm really excited to delve into all of that and hear Amir and Jesse compare notes. So without further ado, I will let them introduce themselves. And if you could just give a little bit of background on the origin stories of YNAB and Doist, how did your companies come to be? Jesse, you're the guest. I'll let you go first.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for putting this all together. I'm really, really looking forward to this. I'm Jesse Amir. I founded YNAB back in 2004. It was a spreadsheet originally that my wife and I had used for the first year we were married and poor and needing to watch every penny. And then we were about to have a baby a year into our marriage, and we really, really wanted Julie, my wife, to be able to stay home with the baby. And so I was trying to come up with ways. She was the main breadwinner at the time, and we were trying to come up with ways where she could stay home with this new baby and just focus there, and I could make some extra money while I finished up my accounting degree. So I thought, well, maybe I could just sell this spreadsheet to people. This was before phones were smart and before all of this that we see now, all this amazing technology. It was before all of that. So the spreadsheet was viable, and I kind of set it up and launched it in September of 2004. And then from there, it's just been one step at a time as we've grown. So it's easy not to have to take on venture capital when you're just trying to push a spreadsheet. So there was no need to look anywhere else. But that's kind of the gist of where I'm from.
Yeah, so the story for me is like very similar, and I think maybe that also like is the reflection of like how similar we are. The two companies are is kind of like that we made this for ourselves, So I think like it's kind of very different maybe mindset if your goal is kind of like to get rich or whatever else like scheme you want to do, and not like just like make tool for yourself that you want to use. So like I started to do this as well, just like as a side project in 2007. I just needed like a tool to kind of help me organize my days. And I also had a really busy period of my life where I was a student. I had like 2 part-time jobs. I had also a lot of personal projects. Yeah. So basically the balance element wasn't really invented yet, like in this like ambition and balance. So it was basically like mostly just ambition, like working a lot. And I really needed to have a tool that could kind of help me manage this. And like in 2007, there was like almost nothing on the market. So there was like some tools like, for instance, Emacs, like the editor/operative system Emacs had like an org mode, which is like super nerdy. And then there were like some online tools, but honestly, like there was almost no great like to-do list managers when I started. Yeah. And the same thing is like, one step at a time, and then suddenly you have like a bigger company, and like the ambition level has gone up and complexity as well. So that's basically where we are at now.
Yeah, I'm curious. We're about 80 people now, I think. How big is YNAB, the team?
I think we're just about maybe a little over 130. So we have.
Okay.
My guess is we probably lean a lot heavier toward needing to support customers in fairly complex situations. Although you say everyone always thinks someone else's company is simpler, when you look at it. So I might be totally misspeaking there. I'm not sure, but we do have probably about half the team is support focused for the customers.
Yeah, we don't have to deal with imports from banks. So
yeah, and so that right there, we're
that's
getting
like half the team right there.
Yeah, like it is getting better. Like that whole environment of like banks and like letting their customers have their own data and things like that. It's getting better. So
I'm probably not the only one who wonders kind of what CEOs do all day. You run a company, but I don't really know what that looks like. And I think a lot of people are curious. So I was wondering if you could just walk us through kind of your typical work day and like how many hours do you typically work and how do you manage your time and how do you prioritize when there are so many things going on? And I'm sure there's a lot clamoring for your attention.
I read at the behest of an employee of mine back in 2008 or 9. She said, "Jesse, you drop the ball a lot on stuff. You tell me you'll get back to me, and then you don't, and I have to follow up with you." And she was saying it honestly and frankly, and she was right. So I read David Allen's Getting Things Done and adopted that, and that's the way I think through things, which Todoist obviously is right there. Where I don't want to keep anything in my head, and so it always goes into my system. But as far as day goes, I don't think it's terribly different than anyone else. I get up and work out, and I have a lot of kids, so there's a lot of like getting kids ready for school and getting them out the door. But I like to be in the office by 8:30, and then I like to be totally out of the office by 4, and find that's pretty good. I mean, for the most part, that's a pretty good balance for me.
And when you say office, is that you have a co-working space or you rent office space or?
Yeah. I have a garage that's detached from my house that's far enough away that it's like the kids have to trek a little bit to come find me. So
the office.
So that's the office. And it's funny because I have 7 kids. So my fourth, Max, he came here the other day, and I realized I've been in this garage for about a year, and I realized he'd only come over there like once this whole time while I've been working, where I have other kids that like sneak over and, will interrupt all the time. But I just work out of a little, it's a 1-person, 1-desk office right here. And and that's that. I love that there's a small commute, a little bit of separation from the home. But I've done the office, I've done the co-working, I've worked in my basement. You kind of try out all different situations. And of course, in the last year, everybody's tried out all kinds of interesting and unique approaches to working at home. So maybe this will evolve. We'll see.
Yeah, I know that Amir also likes that separation in his workplace, although maybe you haven't been able to do that as much this year.
Yeah. The thing for me is like I don't really understand people that work from home, and like if we do some studies or like stats on like remote workers, most work from home. And for me, like I really need the separation and like the on and off switch, because I figured out like early on, like I've been doing remote work for many years now, that else I would just like be working or thinking about work all the time.
Yeah.
And then that's really, really, really unhealthy, I think. So like having like this separation, like physical separation, and also like having, a big screen and stuff like that. You have like the setup. This setup with COVID, like I was kind of like, I'm actually in Chile now and I have like this home office and it kind of works. I have like this space again where I kind of have like it separated, but it's not really the same thing as my usual setup. So, another thing I think is like the CEO work, I think is kind of very different, like depending on like the personality and also maybe the structure that you have. I think like maybe the regular CEO is very different from like a remote first CEO. I I mean, for instance, like for us, especially like in an asynchronous first environment, I don't actually have a lot of meetings. And if I talk with like some other CEOs that are more like normal companies, like you would actually spend most of your time in meetings. So basically like full calendar. And I'm also Jesse, you have like this like normal setup or not. But for me, like I have only a few meetings per week that are really critical. And then the rest of the time is just like spent like writing a lot, reading a lot, and also still coding like some. So I also love still to do like the active work, like that kind of gives me calmness, like doing some coding on the side. So that's it. Like,
every couple of years, Amir posts and says, "Oh, I'm going to step away from coding now for good." And every time he sneaks some little projects in there.
Yeah, you got to embrace it. It's important to kind of keep your feet on the ground. You got to have some kind of projects where you're really getting into the trenches. Otherwise, I feel like you can get a little, I don't know, just a little skewed in your perspective. How long things take, how complex things really are, that kind of thing. So I agree completely. I also, the standing meetings for me, I shove them all on Monday. I kind of make Monday just that day. And then for the most part, except for Mondays, it's kind of open to these kinds of things or anything else that pops up. But yeah, there aren't a lot of standing meetings, at least where I sit now. Other team members might be like, how did you pull that off? They might have more. So.
And do you feel like being remote allows you to do that? Or is that just, even if you were co-located, that you try to maintain that?
I think the discipline that's required working remotely translates to running meetings well and being selective about meetings. But I don't know if they necessarily would have to be that way if you're co-located, that you have a lot of meetings. I just think there's a discipline there where that you kind of bring to, well, do I need to be here? Is this really that important? Could we handle this, all written out where everyone's just kind of giving their thoughts? It's interesting how a lot of co-located situations, like Amazon's famous for their, bring your press release to the meeting and everyone just sits quietly and reads the deck. What they're doing is adopting something that you get asynchronously all the time, where everyone gets a moment to think something through and not have the dynamics of a meeting. So there are a lot of positives. There are loads of downsides to remote work that you have to be aware of and try and counter. But I love that people can. I feel like people can find work-life balance. I don't like that phrase so much, but I feel like they can find it more in a remote environment.
And Jesse, that's why you have 7 kids. Like that's
It's never balanced. Like that's why I hate that. I'm like, what balance are you finding? It really is. It's just about back and forth. It's about like their ebbs and flows to work and to personal stuff. And if one of my kids suddenly gets sick, then there's a flow there, right? And work needs to ebb a little bit. But there's no magic like middle station where everything just stays perfectly balanced. You're always kind of adapting to whatever's coming up.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about how there are downsides to remote work, and I think a lot of people are just interested in how both of our companies operate when we're totally globally distributed. I believe that YNAB has teammates all over the world as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and people obviously have been experiencing that a little bit, maybe for the first time this past year. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe the things that you both see as the biggest downsides of remote work that you have to be aware of, and kind of what advice you would give to someone who's maybe transitioning to leading a remote team for the first time or is building a remote team for the first time.
I can go first. I mean, there's a couple. One thing in particular is it's harder to get those kind of non-work views into people, and so you'll only get like work Becky. So you jump on a Zoom meeting and like Becky's ready for work, and so it's like, okay, we're here for the meeting, and you go, and there's less like standing around and just chatting and getting to know each other, kind of the non-work stuff. And so we've tried to build in a few things that sound really simple, and they are. Like one thing that we run in a lot of our kind of standing meetings that different teams have, they follow roughly the same format, And one of the things we have people do is to start the meeting, everyone gives, it's usually a weekly meeting or, every other week or whatever. So they would say, well, like, what was a personal best since our last meeting, and what was a business best since our last meeting? And that one little personal best bit where someone says, I was able to train my dog to, roll over or whatever. That gives you a little bit of a connection, and it's small, and it's supposed to move pretty rapidly. You don't spend half the meeting reviewing that, but it is important that people just get a little bit of a connection, and it's a little bit of an icebreaker, even when everyone knows each other. Hopping online, the icebreaking in a co-located normal environment is pretty easy, and we've learned all of this already. But when you're sitting across in a Zoom call, it's a little different. So it's an icebreaker. It helps people kind of get to know each other. It's a little forced, like it's totally on the agenda, but it's still valid and still works. So when people first saw it, they were like, that's a little okay. And then when they started doing it, they were saying it was their favorite part of the meeting. So that's just one little thing, but it's about recognizing, okay, these relationships will grow way slower than we would like them to otherwise. So we have to kind of add some accelerant to it otherwise.
Yeah. I think like one of the central issues for me has been like the mental aspects of remote work. And I think like something that maybe people are not really aware of, I think like you need to be much better at like designing your life in a remote setting. Like if you don't do that, it's basically like it can like turn into like really bad, like and vicious, like negative cycle. For instance, like you don't really go out with your friends, or like you work all the time, or like like you can have all kind of these negative, or like you get to sleep late, you get up late, and then like you have these, of course, like having many kids. I also have two. It helps like with these like daily cycles, but still, I think like designing your life is really, really critical, especially like the social life. I think like a lot of people like when they get like older, you get like the social aspect from your work, like and you spend also a lot of time there. You get friends there. In a remote setting, like you get some friends, but like it's not the same thing. So like you kind of like need to find avenues where you can like connect with people, be social with people. So for me personally, like I do a lot of like football. I play a lot of football, and I do it like with some friends, and then we drink some beer and have some fun. And that's kind of like a social like avenue, because like the work environment isn't really there. And even like co-working space, like some of them are really cool, but a lot of them are just like transactional. So it's also even hard to connect there. So probably like hobbies and stuff like that are great things, and just like maybe being mindful about this, because if not, like you will probably lose connection to the friends that you have, and then it's kind of a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I agree. There's something we do when someone comes onto the team where we have them fill out a bucket list, and I had never thought about it in this way of kind of helping to maybe alleviate some of the issues that can come with remote work and not structuring your life a little more. But when we force people to do at least 50 items on a bucket list, then they really have to think like, what do I want? What am I going for? Do I want to travel? Do I want to achieve these things, hit health goals or whatever? But it's a good start if they're first coming into a remote situation where you can kind of prime them like, we want the whole individual to come to work. We don't want you to leave stuff at home. We want the whole person. And so when you let them express themselves through this bucket list that the whole team gets to see, we get to know them a lot easier than we would otherwise. And they also get to see like there's a whole other side of life that needs to be done, right? And so then maybe, they throw something up on Todoist and they're like, these are my steps to take, but it's given them a little structure. Like these are my aspirations, and then breaking it down slowly until it's achievable. So that bucket list for us it was a little bit happenstance the way we landed on it, but it's helped us get to know a person. And it's also helped that person recognize, okay, here's some things to go after besides just work projects and deadlines, things like that.
Yeah, Jesse, we have something very similar where people introduce like 10 facts about themselves, and like some, especially like we had one yesterday that was like really fun and strange. And like these bucket lists, it's basically like like, could you give an example of what that could be?
Yeah, someone might say, I want to run a 5K in under 30 minutes, or I want to visit, I want to hike Mount Fuji or something. So they can be, they're all over the place. What'll happen is you have like voyeur, what's the word? Like a voyeur, where people will look at other people's bucket lists and be like, oh, I want that on my bucket list. Like they're poaching, and they're like, I'm going to do that. So it really does open your eyes up to all kinds of other possibilities. People are building skills or seeing places or doing things with friends or building relationships. It's all over the place, but it's a fun exercise. I honestly, I should go back and revisit mine. I'll bet it's changed a little bit, but otherwise, the interesting thing is, and maybe Amir, you've seen this, but I'll talk with other CEOs that run standard co-located, and I'll share that idea of like, hey, the bucket list helps us get to know people, and then they take it and they have people in cubicles right next to each other that don't know each other as well. And so sometimes we take for granted, we think just because you're next to someone physically that you suddenly know them well, but it still takes work and effort. And a lot of the stuff that we've implemented for a remote company, many companies that aren't remote have adopted and said, oh, this is great either way. So maybe it's just good business. I don't know.
Yeah, something we have that's very similar to this is kind of like asking people what they did the last weekend. So I think that we have like something automated where we basically ask this question, and you basically get like these answers from all around the world. And sometimes like, somebody does something special like in India, and you kind of learn a new like tradition they do or whatever. So there's kind of like also, we have all kind of like crazy aspects of that, because you have like such a multicultural environment, and maybe like in a regular company you don't really have that, like you're mostly from the same city, and mostly the same kind of people as well. Yeah.
Jesse, I think that was really interesting what you said, that remote work just forces you to be a lot more intentional about a lot of things, because you can't just assume it's happening. And so, you said, oh, people are just more efficient because, you have to be a little bit more organized, or you have to be intentional about structures for, create, or habits, I guess, as an organization for creating that culture, which is interesting because, just because you are co-located doesn't mean that you're doing those things.
Yeah. Some culture is being built, but it may not be what you even want, right? The intention is there. It has to be there either way, right? It's got to be there.
Yeah, so that brings up something that I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about it, because a lot of remote work naysayers out there, like, sure, workers are happier working from home. There many surveys and studies show that they're happier, they're more productive, but you're never going to be innovative. You're never going to be creative. You're never going to be able to recreate that, spark of serendipity that you get from office interactions. So I'm curious what you both would say to that.
I'm speechless. Okay. The idea that you have to be in the same room as someone to be creative is, I thought you were going to lead with a softball, like, how do you know they're working? Because I get that one a lot. But I don't know. Maybe we aren't creative. I don't know. I would want to just push back, look at the research, see how they did the study. Like what is that? How did they get to that conclusion? Because I've found that people are happier when you give them autonomy and you let their whole life be part of it. But I think sometimes that creativity, it doesn't have to be at an office, and it doesn't have to be serendipitous. It can just be, you work for it, you try, and it's got to happen in any other way where you're interacting with someone. There needs to, it must happen. So if it's a phone call or a video call or through an email, or someone sitting quietly for a while, not being interrupted. But I think a combination of being able to work deeply by yourself and then being able to interact with people, That's the magic. It isn't the solo person that's all by themselves all the time coming up with these grand things. I mean, history tells us that's not how innovation works, but it's also not just this total brainstorm, everything's a whiteboard all the time. I think there's a balance between the two. And I think remote work gives you that balance where you can pull back and dig in on your own. And then you can also reach out and get together with people all over the world instantly. And with the tools we have now, and I mean, 10, 12 years ago, it was harder to brainstorm and whiteboard and work on UX and manage things. But it's whatever problems there were, they're certainly smaller than they used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see some studies on like great innovative solutions that were like done in like a Slack room or like on a whiteboard. I don't really think like that's how innovation works. And even like if you look at like some of the biggest, things that humans have done over the history, like most of them were like solo things. Like for instance, Einstein, coming up with his theories. And of course, like you need collaboration, you need input, but it's not like synchronized. Like you need to be in the same room, like on a blackboard, like coming up with the best solution. I just think like this kind of a very Silicon Valley way, and maybe like nobody has really like digged into it. Like how does innovation actually happen? And even if you look. Like there's some, of course, studies done on this. I think like HBR did one where probably the best thing is kind of like doing things solo and then like combining, like sharing the stuff and then working again solo instead of just like collaborating all the time where you have like all kind of also maybe group dynamics that aren't really that well. For instance, like extroverted people will probably like take over, or like the person that shouts the most will win most arguments and stuff like that. So I think like this new environment, I think it is like as creative or maybe even more creative than the old one. And maybe it's also like more democratic because it's not like who is the most extroverted, who shouts the most, who is the most dominant that wins like in these innovation fights that happen.
Yeah, there's some conversation in the chat here about with remote work, companies obviously save a lot of money not having office costs, and that gets kind of put onto or can get put onto the worker because they have to buy a house with an extra bedroom or rent an apartment with an extra bedroom to have a space. They have to pay for internet, AC, heating, whatever the case may be. And I think that there's some fear that companies are kind of taking advantage of people. I think, being skeptical of companies doing things for profit is a fair thing. But I was wondering just, I know what Doist perks are, but if both of you could kind of talk about how you, does YNAB have perks for, home office or hardware, that kind of thing, and how you think about that, and also related, how you think about salaries, with locations obviously having a lot of different costs of living. How do you think about that and adjust?
Yeah, the salary one is pretty straightforward. We've iterated on this. We used to pay based on where the person lived. So if they lived in New York, they would be paid more than if they lived in the middle of the U.S. And then they would move to the middle of the U.S. And it didn't sit well with me where you'd go to this great person and say, hey, we love your work. Everything about you is phenomenal. We're going to lower your pay by 35%. And then they'd be like, well, wait, I'm still giving you the same thing. And so there was a weird dynamic there with people that could be mobile and being smart about it. Like I'd say, man, make New York money and live in the middle of the U.S. That's a good move. And so we just ended up standardizing. I can't even remember which pay area, but we ended up just basically standardizing on that and saying we pay Austin, Texas rates maybe, and that's that. And so we might come in a little under if you live in an expensive area, and we might come in a little over, but it's made our lives on the HR side far simpler. And everyone gets to do their own calculus when they're remote. So they can do the calculus of like, I get this, I don't get this. I'm being paid this, I have to do that. I mean, everyone's always doing that equation in their head, and hopefully they don't have to do it all the time and they can get good work done and not be distracted by it. But once that's kind of settled, I feel like you can just let that all get out of the way, and people know they're being paid what market demands, and they feel valued, and then they can just get to work. So that on the salary side, we pay for equipment. I think we do every 3 years, we refresh people's machines. Some people on the team need beefier than machines. I need like a Chromebook basically, but other people need processor power and all of that. So we have a budget for that. We don't do office perks. We don't do anything like that. It's just, I don't know. We're always trying to see like, what could we do here? What could we do there? But that's kind of where we've landed, keeping things simple and as simple as we can. And Becky, to take issue with your company seeking profit, we certainly seek profit.
Right.
We have to, or else we would disappear. So we are always profit minded, but that doesn't mean that it's not this mutually exclusive kind of false dichotomy people set up, like, oh, you either care about profits or your employees. That's obviously I know that's not what you were saying, but it's very profitable to care for your employees. So, but we at the end of the day, we have to look at stuff and have this final constraint of, is this still profitable? Is this long-term viable? And then make decisions from
there. Jesse, it seems like we are quite aligned on this aspect. And I think this is kind of like still like we are still working on our salary formula, and actually location is still like a part. Like, so it's basically one of the variables in our salary formula. And the reason for like location for us being a part is actually not really because of the like it's basically like the high cost of living places, and the problem is like if you don't have that as a variable, you basically can't really afford to hire people in high cost areas, and then they basically have a very bad like life quality, while somebody, especially like I think like Europe or US, it's kind of very similar salaries across. Of course there's like maybe some difference, but if you take like some country in Africa or whatever, like like if you get a salary, a US salary, a European salary there, you basically have like a president level salary, it's and then like the life quality is basically like it's the discrimination of people that actually live in high cost areas. And of course, like honestly, like I think like the way that we are moving towards this is basically like global salary. So for us, like we also peg our salaries for the US market, which is basically the highest market in the world in terms of salaries, because if you don't do that, like you can basically hire anybody in the US because the salaries there are much higher than the rest of the world. And honestly, I think we'll see.
Oh, please. Go ahead, Amir. Well, I would say there's interesting dynamics that are sometimes missed. There's a really good book called Shoe Dog about Phil Knight, who founded Nike. I remember late in the book, I loved the book, crazy story, but late in the book, he was talking about the complexities. Nike was being, this was, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. They were being kind of taken to the mat on the labor in, I think it was Vietnam at the time, where they were doing a lot of manufacturing. And so he was taking a lot of heat from the US, people saying, you can't do this, you shouldn't do this. And then from the other side, he was taking a lot of heat from the officials from the government in Vietnam saying, you can't keep paying what you're paying. We're losing doctors and we're losing valuable members of our society who are choosing to make shoes for you instead of be doctors. And so I remember listening to that, because you're thinking, oh, well, you don't want to, there's this standard story of offshoring this or that, and how it's always for profit. And at least the way Phil Knight came across as he read the book, he just said, this is far more complex than we like to think it is. And we didn't realize we were taking doctors from places because we thought we were paying a great wage. And what you'd said about accidentally paying a presidential wage is a real consideration. It can't just be somebody say, oh, there are no ramifications to this. It's far more complex. So I can at least appreciate that you're iterating and thinking about it, because it's just not simple. It never is.
Yeah, so we're over half an hour already. There's just so much more that I would love to get into. I will ask a last question. If people have questions in the chat, you can put them in there, and we might take a couple right at the end. But you can also always connect with Amir on Twitter. And Jesse, I noticed you're not on Twitter, but it says,
if you wanted.
it says that in your profile that you can email him. So you can always connect with them other ways and ask questions. But I just, the products Todoist all about productivity, and YNAB all about budgeting and personal finance. I'm curious if you just have one piece of advice in each area for people. You can only give them one piece of advice. What would you say, for both productivity and personal finance, one each?
I'll go first if that's okay. I would cheat, and I'll just do one for both. But the one thing that bothers me in the personal finance space, or someone that will say, I'm just not good with money, and I'll look at them and I'll be talking to a neurosurgeon, and literally they fix people's brains, and then they're like, I'm not good with money. And I just think to myself, that person who has tremendous drive and is so focused on doing like almost superhuman type of work, then as soon as all of that effort and drive and 20 years of schooling is converted into $1, they're just like, I don't care. And that always surprises me, because they clearly care about everything leading up to the conversion of their effort into $1. And then once it becomes $1, it's like, I'm not good at it. So I would just say the same intention that you bring to your to-do list and your day, if you're doing it right, is that same intention still brought to the $1 once your efforts have been converted. But it's still all about what do you intend? What do you want? So whether you're facing your day and you're time blocking it all, or you've got a nice prioritized list, or you have like your next most important thing, or just, I want to get my A done and then B and then C, whatever it is, there's this intention there that is missing from the money piece, and is missing a lot of times from when people are planning their day. And so I feel like that's where we have this massive overlap, is you guys take people's mess in their heads and you get intention behind it. And we take people's mess of their money and just get intention behind it. And then they feel good. And it feels like we've done something amazing. And that's all we've done is just had them clarify what they want. So that's my tip, I guess. Know what you want, right? From a day or from $1.
That's beautiful, Jesse. And honestly, like something that I really need to do is like get budget as well, because I have never done this, and it makes a lot of sense. Like, I'm very like planning oriented and like very structured usually, but like finance based, like wild west is kind of like and that's a very bad place to be, because like you'll probably spend money on a lot of like bad stuff, and and especially like like every one of us like need to plan for the future, and if you have like kids and stuff like that, then so I will take that tip, and I will definitely like try to read more about this and implement it more. So and my tip, I don't really have a tip for budgeting, because like that isn't really my strong suit yet. Maybe like in a year where I become a ninja, I will have some tips. But regarding productivity, I think like something that's like the most critical part is really the system. Like what kind of system do you have? And actually like on our side, and Becky was one of the writers, is like we have guides on like all kind of systems that you can have. And probably like, implementing a system, sticking to it is probably the most central piece of it. And also like maintaining it, because what we see a lot is like people, like you use like a to-do list like 2 days out of the week, that isn't really a good system, because that means like the rest of the days you have like huge hole, and you're just like winging it, and that kind of creates like all kind of stress. And actually, like I think like if we look at the stress, then probably like finance is something generates a lot of stress for people, a lot of anxiety, and also maybe like just like work related or like planning related stress and anxiety. So with our tools, I think maybe they can kind of solve like two of the really big problems that most people face.
Yeah,
I think
and
that's
I think, well, I was just going to say, like, I think adopting a system and then kind of pretending it's a prescription. I think sometimes people will take a system and they'll say, "Oh, well, I'll take this part and that part and that part," but they aren't good enough to adapt it yet. You should just take the pill as prescribed by the doctor and do the whole thing, and then after a year or whatever, you can realize, make it a little more your own and tailor it. But at first, just adopt it like it's just the most dogmatic gospel you can find, and then see how it works. Usually we change things before we even are informed enough to make a good decision. So when someone's looking through Todoist and like, I want to do it like that, just do it like that. Don't change a thing. Be dogmatic for a while, and then you can start to let things be more personalized. But the internet is the horrible thing in that regard, because we're always just on the hunt for the better thing instead of just doing what we have.
Yeah, it's true in the diet industry. It's true in productivity. It's true in personal finance for sure. Well, thank you both for your time. This has been really interesting, and I hope folks have enjoyed it. If you're interested in implementing those systems, YNAB, youneedabudget.com. They have a great app, and it's also a system, a 4-step system that I've implemented myself. I know Amir, right after he gets off his call, is going to go right there and learn it. But I found it really helpful myself. If you're already a YNABer and you're interested in organizing everything that you need to get done in a day and getting that all out of your head and into a system, check out Todoist.com. I hope you all have enjoyed it. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.